All right, shall we kick it off? Hello, everyone. My name's Sara Gingold, and I'm the editor-in-chief of DSE's Resource Hub. And just to describe myself, I'm a white woman with a short brown bob, wearing a very colourful jacket. And I'm co-hosting this event along with Todd, and we would like to welcome you back for another open dialogue. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. For me, I'm on Wurundjeri land, and I want to recognise the continued connection to the land and the waters of this beautiful place and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and also to pay respect to all elders and ancestors and any First Nations people joining us today.
Hi everyone, I'm Todd Winther. I'm currently sitting in a motorised wheelchair. I have short hair with a green shirt on. For those of us who haven't been to one of our events before, think of it as a live show where you can control the conversation. It's designed to be inclusive, accessible, collaborative, respectful, and most importantly, fun. We encourage you to have your camera on if you're comfortable with that. We will also be collecting all your comments and questions in the chat throughout the event and may even ask for your participation if you want to join.
Yes, and just a little bit of background about us. The Disability Dialogue is a project to promote inclusive, collaborative, disability-led conversations. And before we start, I want to shout out our partners, including the Disability Advocacy Network Australia, Inclusion Australia, Alliance 20, and the Melbourne Disability Institute. We're funded through an Information Linkages and Capacity Building grant from the Department of Social Services. Also, a shout out to our media partners, Power D and Vision Australia Radio. So, shall we get started on today's topic? It's a big one. We're going to look at what good support looks like outside of the NDIS for children and their families. Now, we like to try be as jargon-free as possible in these events, which is very hard when talking about the NDIS, but I think it's important that we define this category called targeted foundational supports, because it's an important term to get across where we're seeing it used a lot lately by politicians, in the news, and different organisations who work in this space. So what are targeted foundational supports? So they're a type of support for people with disability who need some help with their everyday lives but aren't eligible for the NDIS. And it's about making sure, even if you're not on the NDIS, you still get the support you need and get the same opportunities as everyone else in the Australian community. And it might be helpful to go back to the explanations we used in last month's event, which some of you might have attended and some of you might have missed, but it's a good refresher.
So one way to think about it, which we have talked about last month, is it's like having three buckets, which we can see on the diagram. In the first bucket is mainstream services, which is at the bottom of our diagram. Everyone in Australia needs and has the right to use mainstream services like health, education, or transport. And these services have a responsibility to be inclusive and accessible for everyone. Now, we all know that they often spectacularly fail at this, but that's a conversation for another day. The point is that everybody has the right to use these services and everyone needs all of these services. So this bucket has to be a pretty big bucket.
It does indeed. And now the second bucket, the one at the top of the diagram, is the NDIS. I joked last time that you might have heard of it. I imagine you've still heard of it. It's a big bucket, but it's not as big as mainstream services. And you have to be eligible to use services in this bucket. And as everyone here knows, not everyone with a disability is eligible for the NDIS, but also not everyone needs it. And finally, there's a teeny weeny bucket stuck in the middle of those two buckets, but it's a bucket that we think should be growing. And this is for bucket is for people with disability and their families for disability supports, but not funded by the NDIS. And that is what we call foundational supports. So some people with disabilities might use these services a lot, some might never use them, but the point is that they should always be there for people when they need them. And in that bucket are things like peer support and self-advocacy and independent information. And that's what we call general foundational supports. And these are things that we think most people with disabilities will use at some point in their lives. Sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, but when you need that information or advice and it's not there, you really notice it.
In this bucket, there should be some services for people with disability who need some help in their everyday lives. For the NDIS, these are targeted foundational supports. We say these should be in this bucket because these services basically don't exist at the moment, and it's why the bucket is so tiny. We've described it here today like buckets, but the NDIS review talked about the same thing. They just described it slightly differently. If you went to one of the town halls last year about the NDIS review, you would have seen this shown as the triangle with the NDIS shown at the top. That's what we want to focus today. What the review called targeted foundational supports. And we're specifically going to be talking about the ones that are for children and their families. Many of you would have seen the speech made by the Minister for Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme, Mark Butler, actually made a pretty big announcement about this last week. It's relevant for this event. And Sara, I know working with you at DSC, you've written a really comprehensive article about this. So can you tell us a bit more about the announcement, please?
Yes, and thank you, Todd, also because we were watching the announcement together. So your chat and contribution really helped me get across it. I want to be clear first off that there is a lot that we don't know, and we're basing this largely on Mark Butler's, the Minister for the NDIS's speech at the press club last Wednesday and subsequent media events, but there's still very limited information. So here is what we do know. The federal government is talking about introducing a new system called Thriving Kids. And the minister suggested that Thriving Kids will be particularly targeted at children with, and these are his words, mild to moderate developmental delay and autism. And what we don't know, and what I imagine is still to be designed, is what Thriving Kids will look like and what services it will include. But Mark Butler, in his press club address, did mention some initiatives the government is thinking of, including universal checks for children, more training for GPs, an allied health item in Medicare for children, online information and services, and also community drop-in centres. He also said that health services and early education centres and schools will have a bigger role to play in delivering Thriving Kids. And the minister said he wants to get this program launched by mid-2026, so about a year from now.
I know, like me, Sara, that you've been frustrated about the confusion in the mainstream media. So let's clear some context up a bit and talk about this in slightly more detail. What everyone wants to know is Thriving Kids replacing foundational supports?
No, so Thriving Kids is a way of talking about targeted foundational supports for children. But the other day, the minister did say they are still looking at other foundational support systems for other people to use.
So what does that mean for kids who are receiving NDI support at the moment?
So again, this is just going off what the minister said last week, but he said that children currently on the NDIS or who join the NDIS before Thriving Kids rolls out, they won't be automatically kicked off the NDIS and onto Thriving Kids. But the minister did say they will still be subject to eligibility assessments like they are now. So they might, which basically means their access and eligibility for the scheme might be reviewed regularly. We do, and I want to make it like very clear, we understand there's a lot of mixed feelings about this in the community, and a lot of people are really nervous, and it's particularly difficult when we don't have a lot of information to go on, and like particularly when you're depending on these supports and they make such a big difference in your life. Just want to really acknowledge that the anxiety out there.
So, according to the government, what's going to happen next?
It looks like there's going to be a consultation period where the government will be talking to a lot of different people about how Thriving Kids should work, which actually makes today's discussion even more important, because we're here to talk about what good support for children and families look like. And those are the kind of stories and ideas that we really want the government to hear to help them shape how Thriving Kids will work, so that basically children and families continue to receive support that helps them thrive.
So we're going to share some links throughout today in the chat, including Sara's wonderful article that she wrote on Wednesday. But we're going to shift the discussion a little bit. Before I introduce our first guest, I want to encourage you in the chat to share your own thoughts and ideas as we go. We'll also be taking questions from the chat throughout the event. Now I want to move on to our next section. I want to introduce our first guests, Stella and Sara Barton. Stella is a disability rights advocate and Paralympian. She attended Shelford Girls Grammar and has a Bachelor of Arts from Swinburne University. In 2024, she competed at the Paris Paralympics in the Grade 1 Para Dressage, scoring over 70% in all her events and coming 7th from a field of 22 riders in her grade. Stella has been involved in activism and accessible public transport and has also presented in community radio programs for SYN FM and 3CR. And Sara is also joining us. She's Stella's mum. Sara is a 2010 Churchill Fellow with 30 years of filmmaking experience. Her first film, Untold Desires, talked about sexuality and disability, and she won her first Logie Award for SBS Television and an AFI Award. Sara is currently making a feature documentary about comedian, disability activist, and my friend Stella Young. Thank you, Sara and Stella, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us here.
No worries.
Great. Yeah.
So firstly, can you talk about the kind of support that was available for Stella when she was young, Sara?
Sure. Well, the NDIS was really just a twinkle in a few people's eye back when Stella was, before she was at school age. So she was born in 1999, and a lot of us thought that something like an NDIS would be a brilliant idea, but it was absolutely not even on the radar back then. And so what we had was actually incredibly inadequate early intervention support. It was confusing and hard to figure out where we should go and all of that sort of thing. But if you could find your way through the maze, you could find certain kinds of group support and group activities. But it was really up to us to go and find the therapy that Stella needed, and also at a level that was going to make any kind of change to her cerebral palsy. We knew that the concept of brain plasticity. You have a child who's born with a brain injury, and you've got, a window of opportunity to improve that child's outcome. We know the differences that happen with good early intervention compared to the bad old days when kids were put in institutions and they just didn't thrive at all. So we know that it's really important to have a lot of good quality early intervention. And look, that was really very limited in what you could get back when Stella was, at that age where she desperately needed it.
Stella, I know it might be hard for you to remember because you're a young girl at that time, but is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that's this stage of things. Yeah, she hasn't got anything to say at this point. And she would probably barely remember it, except that we've still got friends that we met back then.
So you did a lot of programs through an organisation called Noah's Ark, Stella. Were there any particular challenges or things that could have been done differently? And Sara, feel free to jump in.
It's probably, yeah. So one of the things we had talked about in the lead up to this event was that, what was on offer through kind of funded support. So we didn't receive any individual funding for Stella's therapy, but we tried to find what might be, like you when you enter the world of disability, you would just assume that there's all of this infrastructure to deal with it, and there kind of wasn't. But we did find an early intervention playgroup that we went to, and it was in some ways that don't happen so much now. It was wonderful because we got to meet some other families, we got to exchange ideas, we got that sense of community. But of course, on the other hand, therapeutically, it was almost completely inadequate because it was once a fortnight. And, for an hour and a half or maybe an hour, I don't actually remember. So it was really it was very minimal and piecemeal. But what we did get was the opportunity to ask other families what they'd found and the opportunity to tell them what we'd found. So sharing ideas and information was fantastic. But really that was because the system was so fragmented. And there were places that offered more comprehensive support, but you couldn't get in. They were just full. So I think in the context of what's happening now, I think there's some positive things that actually are inherent in doing things with other people, in developing community and that sort of thing, and doing things within mainstream services. But the fundamental thing is that there has to be enough to actually make a real difference to people's lives, and it also has to service not just us that live in the inner city. At the time, we had the best access to things, but we have to think as a nation that a lot of people live in rural and regional areas and even remote areas. So we really do have to create a new framework that offers adequate, multiple times a week. You can't just be going once a fortnight to see some specialist teacher in a school. It has to be a lot of intervention. And the other thing, sorry, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit here, but
sure.
You were talking about services being offered in schools. And one of the things that this was what Stella would remember is that, throughout her childhood, many afternoons a week after school were spent driving often across town, for 45 minutes or so to see the physiotherapist one day, the speech therapist, the OT, the osteopath, all of these specialists that they were great, but we basically spent just about every afternoon after school with Stella and her brother killing each other in the back seat of the car, driving to these different therapies. And it was incredibly inefficient. And it also took away from Stella's childhood, her ability to do other fun things, although you did go to ballet and horse riding and stuff as well. So, yeah.
And
Yeah, so we'd be driving for hours and hours, and by the time you get home, it'd be 6 o'clock, and the kids would be starving, and they spend a lot of time wanting to kill each other because one of them really didn't need to be there, but he had to come because you can't just leave a 5-year-old at home after school.
I'm sure my brother had very similar stories, and that he wanted to kill me in the back of the car too. If you've just joined us late, everybody, I'm talking with Stella and Sara Barton. I want to remind people who need extra access that there is Ausland available and captioning available. But I want to throw it to you now, Stella. Can you remember about the different types of supports you received and whether you had a preference between group and one-on-one support?
Well, I manipulate a lot of my own for the group up the month was talking about before. I a lot of it, but I manipulate a lot of one-on-one support with the and egg and there was a lot of one-on-one appointments with various activities, right? And yeah, it was a lot, and I look back now and even though it was incredibly helpful and helped me get where I am now, it was very, it's like Mum is away.
Yeah, so just to recap, she had a lot of one-on-one appointments with physio, speech, OT, and although it did have an impact on her function and physical well-being, it sort of took away from your sort of ordinary childhood somewhat. And I think also there was a kind of very much a sort of medical model focus on, medically we've got to get you well, and it didn't really include anything that sort of developed into community and just a sense that you were part of, something bigger, and there was a tendency to feel like we were the only ones going through this,
I've been through a very similar experience. Lots of early intervention. The practitioners were really focused on getting me walking and up and moving about. And I remember as a child that's not really what I wanted to do. I just wanted to really focus on the stuff that I was good at rather than what the practitioners really wanted me to do. And I can hear that sort of a similar theme coming through in your response there, Stella.
Yeah, there was a big gave me a walk and walk well, and I think that was the man really was walking, and yeah, I'm not doing I'm if it ever walking like boy dad later at my video place and walking and yeah, it was all mostly all about walking.
Yeah, well, there was a sort of obsession with walking, but I just thought of something else that happened like in amongst all of this, because yes, we did physio and speech therapy and that, but one of the things I very sort of quickly figured out was that we also needed to make things fun. And so we were incredibly fortunate. We were actually at swimming lessons. Stella was learning to swim. And the swimming teacher suggested that, maybe Stella could do ballet. And she knew of a ballet school that Stella could go to. And the teacher turned out to be incredibly inclusive, like really inclusive. So Stella started doing ballet when she was 4. And she just reminded me when she was 4. And I remember the ballet teacher was the first person who ever said to me, you can leave her here and come back in an hour. Like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And
I remember the teacher has also one of the old meeting
she'd organised one of the older students to help Stella in the class. And she really, really got it. And I mean, she used to yell at you the same as she yelled at everybody else, which was amazing.
That's true. That's true inclusion, isn't it? Really,
Yeah, it sure is.
when you get the brunt of the feedback.
Yeah, but Stella was part of that ballet school from the age of 4 to the age of 16. She did every concert, suffered through hours of rehearsals, and look, not every moment of it was accessible. The backstage at the concerts was a nightmare. There were lots of things that were like, not perfect, but that mainstream ballet school and being part of it, not only did it give Stella fantastic skills with her poise and ability to kind of move her body, balance and all of that, but it was social and inclusive, and the teacher was amazing. So, and then of course she did Writing for the Disabled, which you really took to. Not every child wants to be on horses, but it worked for you. So there were kind of lovely sort of group activities. And one of the things that frustrates me so much about the NDIS is that it's completely lost that focus on how do we support a ballet school to include somebody like Stella. If the teacher doesn't have the confidence or the skills to do that well, how does the NDIS engage with the mainstream world to say, here's, disabled people want to be a part of your school or your group or your activity or whatever, here's the support to include them better, and maybe even I just think that was lost way too early on. When all of the paid service providers swooped in and took all the money, it was lost, that idea that mainstream services could support people to do things without feeling like they had to have a support worker to do it,
And that kind of leads me to my next question, Sara. And I want to talk about your journey as a parent. Could have been overwhelming early on, especially if you didn't know much about disability services. So trying to make sure you got the best support for Stella and navigating a very complex system was like encountering a whole new world, possibly. So what kind of support was useful for you as a parent?
Well, we were very, very lucky that we had some close family friends. Stella's, we thought it was kind of possible that she was going to have cerebral palsy from the day she was born, because there was it was a difficult birth. And we actually just happened to have family friends who had a 5-year-old daughter who also had cerebral palsy. They'd had a difficult birth as well, different but similar. And when we were in hospital with, Stella as a little one in intensive care, they were the first people that came in and took us out to lunch and, talked to us about, they didn't overload us. They didn't want to freak us out too much because we just had a new baby and we weren't we weren't fully receptive, but to just have friends that we knew we could turn to when we were ready. And it took a while for us to be ready to sort of say, okay, I think we need some help here. And so that was incredibly fortuitous, just knowing other people who were 5 years ahead of us down the track. And the fact that they sort of very generously they just said, look, we're here. When you're ready, or if you need something, come and see us. The mother was a nurse, so she sort of had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. Probably knew before I did, But also I'd made films with the disability community as well, so I was not uncomfortable in the disability world. I'd had time and kind of contacts and all of that sort of thing. But having those friends, I think, was a real game changer, and just having that, what you might call peer support, but it was very informal. That was great. And then, of course, once we had accepted the sort of likelihood that she was going to have cerebral palsy, then finding our way through all the services, that was a lot, but, you know, pretty much a full-time job. But,
it is, isn't it? I had a friend that described it last week as really 10 full-time jobs because you're always on the go. I can see a lot of parallels between your story and mine, both Sara and Stella. So I wanted to ask you what it was like for you, Stella, when you were younger, because I can remember as I was growing up, doctors were increasingly asking me and my parents to have surgeries when I was younger, and I had 3 or 4 operations when I was a kid, and that sort of balance between wanting to do what you wanted to do as a child, and that sort of balance between what you wanted and what was medically feasible or available. How did you feel about that, Stella?
Yeah, well, growing up, I remember that I had the but when I was about 14 years old, the doctor and the agents,
can I just recap so that people can understand you? Yeah, so there was a lot of medical staff, and when Stella was about 14, the doctors and the surgeons. Want to backtrack a little?
I had like maybe 3 or 4 but
So she'd had 3 or 4 rounds of Botox with the surgeon. Yeah, so they were designed to relax her muscles, and it did work a bit. It worked for a while.
But eventually it would wear off.
It would wear off, and yeah.
And Sara, must have been quite a balance between what the doctors were recommending and what Stella was telling you that she wanted. It must have been a really difficult balance to sort of navigate.
Well, at that point, at the Botox point, it wasn't too bad, but it was when they started suggesting multi-level leg surgery that it got tricky. So, Stella, you want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah. You're about 14.
When the doctor, and they had my parents about having the multi-level surgery, and
the doctors started talking about having multi-level surgery on her legs, and
it was a big
thing
for
all of us, yeah.
And I was really adamant that I didn't want to have it. And I remember that when someone like me, the result would be very
So Stella was adamant she didn't want to have the surgery, and they also said that the results were variable. They weren't going to guarantee any results.
But at the same time, they were I had the surgery and well, I'd be able
So they were saying that if the surgery went well, she would be able to walk down the street and walk wherever she wanted to go.
And at that point in my life,
That
my goal was to be able to move around my house and maybe something.
so at that stage, her goal was to walk around the house and maybe carry something.
I didn't want to be able to walk long distance. That's why I have my electric.
You had an electric wheelchair, and you really wasn't a goal to walk long distances.
There was really items that I did not want to do, but I'm not
To me, yeah, yeah, yeah.
about you.
Yeah. So Stella was really like instantly like, I'm not having this surgery. Like she was terrified of it. But as the adults in the room, like Stella was 14, 13, and we as her parents felt like, I mean, doctors are well educated. They've got a lot of experience and all of that sort of thing. So we felt that it was our responsibility to make sure that we were making the right decision, and that if there was a compelling argument why she really needed to have the surgery, then maybe it was something that we needed to kind of try and bring her over the line. But one day the doctor said something about, the surgery will make her legs look straighter. And that was the moment when I just went, oh, I don't think this is a lot. They were talking about 12 months of rehab. After we'd said no, it turned out it was more like 2 years of rehab. My husband, actually, to his credit, was much quicker to go with Stella and say, no, if she doesn't want it, we're not having it. For me, I was a little bit more maybe impressed by the doctors, which I'm ashamed to say, because it would have been the wrong decision. And I think there's a real risk in our society that we look to doctors as being wiser than they are. But surgeons will always recommend surgery, nearly always. And sorry, what did... Oh, yeah, well, yeah. So surgeons will, often recommend surgery. And also we'd seen our friends who were 5 years ahead of us, they had also done the surgery and it had been very unsuccessful. And we saw that as kind of something that we didn't want to do. And so in the end, we just said, no, we're not doing it. And it was the best decision we ever made. So, but it was really led by Stella. It was a very, very hard time in our lives to kind of really feel like we were making the best decision. And there's lots of other details that we won't go into here. But it's just a important message for families to understand that you're the ones that have to do those year or two of rehab. The surgeon's not going to be there to do all the exercises that need to be done and deal with the pain and all of that,
Cut first, ask questions later type thing, hey?
Yeah.
I am a bullying mom, and it really overpowered by the doctor. And
They had the power.
yeah.
Yeah. So we're educated and privileged, and we felt the doctors had the power. I hate to think what families that perhaps have less confidence to speak out, perhaps not so well educated, there are people who would be much less able to say no, than we were.
Well, we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but before we address those, I'd like to thank you both, but especially Sara, for sharing her lived experience, and yours too, Sara, for sharing your experience and telling some stories and hopefully educating our audience. But Sara's got the first question in the chat, so over to you, Sara.
Yeah, and thank you. That was really so interesting to hear. I love the story about the ballet school, the mainstream ballet school, which it just shows that there's a place for mainstream services, there's a place for specialist services.
Totally.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. And so we had some great questions coming through. And the first one is from Jax, and it's for you, Stella. Were there things you found hard or even damaging about early intervention?
I was when I was really young, but I think this is I what we are about this overboarding. I had to do an always it get me to walk well. I think now that I had a deputy able at all more or more I going overboard is not as when people everybody people but you know
All this
about
walking.
and like now yeah.
I guess just to summarize it, sometimes because you're an athlete, sometimes people will suggest, Stella physically could walk around the block and it would be a good form of exercise for her. But in her mind, walking is about therapy and tedium and torture. And, it's just like, no, I'm not walking, I'm not doing that.
That's fair.
Yeah. And for physio, for me, it's like I associate that with pain as well, which is why I don't want to have a bar of physiotherapy as an adult. But one final question for you again, Stella. And somebody asked, are you still friends with the people that you interacted with at Noah's Ark? And how about the people in the ballet class that you mentioned?
Well, the people help as they are they are with my oldest.
Your oldest friends, yeah,
They,
to this day.
we are together and they are doing like
Oh, they were in Paris, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It was really having
As friends.
yeah, but
Yeah. And we've got other friends from the early intervention group that we're still in contact with.
yeah.
And you also still have a friend that you actually we didn't realize that as 4-year-olds they were at ballet together, and then they met at school and they're still friends. So
Oh, awesome.
That's lovely.
yeah.
Thank you again, Sara and Stella, for sharing your stories and lived experience. I hope I speak for the audience when I say that I got a huge amount out of that. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
an
thank
absolute
you.
pleasure. We enjoyed it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And now, before we go to break, we sent out a survey to everyone before this event, and thank you so much to everyone who filled it out. And one of the questions we asked was, what are your memories of early intervention? How did it make you feel? And I just want to clarify some terminology. When we're talking about early intervention, we're talking about support when children are younger, early in life. And this slide shows some of the responses that we got. We haven't been able to include them all, of course, but they were all really helpful. So here's a couple. I love this first one. For me, early intervention was not a small thing. It was a lifeline. It changed my story from one of fear and exclusion to one of hope and possibility. Someone else said, I felt included. And another person said, extremely grateful and thankful to them and my amazing mum, the force behind it all. Because if it was not for her, I would not be the person I am today. I really related to that last
Mm.
one. I'm dyslexic, and the teachers at school didn't like believe I was dyslexic, but my mum, she knew, and she fought for me to get a diagnosis. And the early intervention really helped me. I Yeah, now I'm a writer, so it helped me quite a lot. But it was something that we had to source privately, which I think is sad because it makes it less accessible for other people. Um, and there was also another response that said that there wasn't any early intervention, which really shows how different some of the experiences can be.
Yeah, they're different for everyone. And like you, Sarah, I really resonated with those earlier responses, particularly regarding my parents did an awful amount of work, taking me to sorts of appointments and things. But those appointments were only available because the government actually gave enough funding to actually have those available to kids in my generation. We've gone through a lot of content here at this point, so we're going to take a 10-minute break now for everybody to digest what we've listened to and learnt. And we've got two terrific guests after break: Gretchen Young from Snake and award-winning disability inclusion and gender activist Aki Newell. So we hope you can stick around for more conversations. Enjoy your break, everyone.
And we're back. Welcome back, everyone. Um, and thank you for all the great comments you've been posting in the chat and the question. Please keep those coming. If you're keen to jump on camera later on and turn on your mic and make a comment, that would be wonderful. This event is all about trying to hear from you as well. And we will try get through some thoughts and opinions later on. So maybe have a think now about what you want to say. Get yourself ready. But first up, we have Gretchen Young. And Gretchen is a Gadigal Eora descendant from Redfern, New South Wales. And before relocating to Melbourne, lived in northern New South Wales, Budjalung country for many years. Gretchen is the Executive Director of Programs at SNAKE, the National Voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children. Welcome, Gretchen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, we're so glad. So Gretchen, the first question I have for you is, how do you think the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families accessing support is different from the experiences of non-Indigenous families? And if I could make it a double question,
Yeah.
what do you think this new system Mark Butler has announced, Thriving Kids, needs to consider in order to ensure it also meets the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children?
Yeah, great questions. Thanks, Sara. So I'd like to just start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from unceded Wurundjeri country, and to acknowledge traditional custodians and elders from all of the countries that you're joining from, and also acknowledge any of my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters on the line today. So in terms of the first question of experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, just I guess some framing is that the NDIS review found that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were almost 2.5 times more likely to have a disability compared with the general population of children. So despite this, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and their families regularly miss out on services put in place to support early assessments, identification and delivery of developmental supports for children who need them. So the experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children accessing support is marked with difficulties navigating the complexity of the current NDIS, and we're talking kind of current at the moment, and the general service system. And while this challenge isn't unique to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families or children, there are added barriers, including the lack of safety in the cultural safety in services and geographical barriers for remote communities. When Aboriginal children and families are looking to access services that bring along the whole family, aunties, grandparents, and extended family. For families that do manage to get NDIS plans or are seeking support outside of the NDIS, the next barrier is finding appropriate programs and services in their communities. And for many, this is impossible, as often they don't exist or they're just not accessible. So this might be due to things like geographical isolation, or one of the things that's very common in our communities is fear of the child protection system or a lack of cultural safety. Assessment tools used are often not culturally appropriate and don't consider Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing. SNAKE is working alongside the University of Melbourne to roll out an assessment tool that is culturally responsive for our communities. In consultation with communities, Aboriginal community-controlled services, and I'll refer to them as ACOs, just to keep everyone around all of the acronyms, that SNAKE held in 2024, we consistently heard early childhood services report challenges finding available allied health practitioners to visit their communities or to refer their families to, particularly for remote communities. Even if families get through all of those barriers to access supports, the way that the health system understands disability is very different from how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities understand it. In many Aboriginal languages, there's no word for disability. The Aboriginal culture is one of inclusion, and disability is just part of the diversity of people in the community. What a wonderful way to be, right?
Exactly.
So there's a strength to Aboriginal communities where no one is left behind and everyone belongs and is accepted as they are. But it can also create barriers in understanding what the child's support needs are. In SNAKE's conversations with families, we often hear about the shame that can come with the label of disability. The experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and children with developmental delays and disability is often one of dealing with intersecting barriers as a result of both disability and being an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person. All of these barriers and challenges often result in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children not being assessed or being assessed later in life and not accessing the supports they need to thrive in their communities. So the second question that you raised, Sara, was about some of the lessons that we have from our Aboriginal community-controlled organisations and how that can be applied to thriving kids or the sector more broadly. So the way that we often think about ACOs or Aboriginal community controls organisations are that they're holistic, so they're not siloed. They're sustainable, so they're always thinking long-term and long-term funding cycles. They're inclusive, so they centre relationships and voices that are not always heard, and they're healing, about restoring balance. So ACOs take a strength-based, child and family-centred approach to service delivery, and this results in services that are holistic, tailored, relationship-based and responsive to need. These services often have an open door policy, staffed by local community members that have knowledge and insight into families' lives. And we all know that families are the experts, right? So with place-based and community-centred approaches, ACOs often bring multiple services to the child and family in one location, rather than the family having to attend multiple locations. ACOs, or Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, create an open and welcoming space that the community are welcome to come to any time and have a voice in. So this has great benefits for the community in reducing barriers to access. It also means ACOs really understand the needs of the community and that they're present in and can develop solutions collectively that will work for them. We know that in the context of early years services, many Aboriginal community-controlled led early integrated services provide offerings beyond the traditional early childhood education centre or settings. Families access these broader services after entering the ACO for early childhood services. Providing such avenues for entry is important for families to determine their needs at their own pace.
That's wonderful. Like Gretchen, and when we were speaking earlier in the week, we were talking about how a lot of the learnings from that you've had working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, and it's like including some of the strengths that are coming from it and also some of the barriers that you face, can really help inform what Thriving Kids looks like for the broader community. And I guess, what would you like, what are the lessons you would like to see?
One of the things that we would like to see is, I guess, those experiences of the ACOs, that they're both a reflection and representation of community.
Mm.
And whether or not that's boards of governance, cultural governance at being at the core of those centres, whether or not it's reflected of community being involved, whether it's volunteering or parental engagement, but they're reflective and representative. So ACOs have such strong relationships with the communities that where they're present, they understand the needs of the whole community, including children and families, because children are just at the centre of all of that work. Those, the ripple is that it's whole of community involved. So the connection and accountability that ACOs have to community makes them uniquely placed to identify the services, the supports that are most needed and will have the greatest impact. So the diversity of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector is overlooked or misunderstood. And at SNAICC, we often hear about the lack of capacity of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector. So we flipped this because at SNAICC we're always trying to look at strength-based approaches and solutions. So we flipped it to have a focus on the capability. So we talk about place-based organisations that often have 50 years of experience in governance, financial management, and managing multiple funding streams, as well as being reflective of community. ACOs go well beyond the mainstream scope of childcare and early education to provide holistic wraparound support for children and extended families. ACOs have been the leaders of holistic early childhood supports for decades, long before terms like integrated hubs were coined in the mainstream. ACOs play... Yeah, I know, right?
I was just going to say, I love that it sounds like they're very much like a part of the community, not separate to the community. It's like a natural embedded thing, which makes, I imagine it feels safer to go and seek support from an ACO compared to an organisation you've never heard of before. Or
I'll give you a funny yarn, Sara. Somebody asked me once, how do ACOs promote their services in community? Like, how do community know where to go? And we're like, because they are community. Do you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't need to have a formal referral, or you wouldn't need to Google their website. People just know where they are. So, as I said, Sara, ACOs play such a crucial role in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, providing culturally safe services, including disability services. They also support communities to navigate government and non-Indigenous service systems, including but not limited to the NDIS, justice, health, social and community services, and on the new landscape as Thriving Kids.
Yeah. I imagine another important concept is cultural safety. And so what does cultural safety in support mean, and why is it so important?
I'm going to give you a bit of a word wall around definitions, but one of the things before I do that is that I really want to, emphasise that cultural safety is about the people that are going to be impacted by unsafe behaviour defining it.
Yes.
So for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they would define what cultural safety is, as opposed to a mainstream service or government telling them we are culturally safe. People feel it. So cultural safety is the positive recognition and celebration of cultures. It's more than just the absence of racism or discrimination, and more about cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. It empowers people and enables them to contribute and feel safe to be themselves. SNAICC defines cultural safety for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children as the child being provided with a safe, nurturing and positive environment where they're comfortable with being themselves, expressing their culture, their spiritual and belief systems, and they're supported by the carer who respects their Aboriginality and therefore encourages their sense of self and identity. I've had lots of conversations in the last couple of weeks about how that applies to not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and children, but to, wider marginalised and vulnerable groups, and how we can use that feeling of cultural safety in multiple settings. So it's important to note that for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, the painful legacies of the stolen generation are very much present and experienced in the present day. This creates fear of child protection interventions when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families navigate government systems, access services, or interact with mainstream organisations. Cultural safety is about creating an environment where families and children do not experience fear and they feel like they belong. Cultural safety is essential for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children's wellbeing and development, and it is really up to the people engaged to define their cultural safety, as I said, not service providers or government. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and young people, families and communities are more likely to access services that are culturally safe and experience better outcomes in those services. It's critical that disability services and supports are culturally safe for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and families. And as I said, we also engage with the applicability of cultural safety in multiple settings. But I'm really happy to take any questions, Sara.
I really, that was so interesting. And I guess something that really stood out to me is that like a lot of it is about how you feel. Do you feel safe accessing the service? And maybe sometimes a person might not know what cultural safety means to them until they are in an experience where they're not experiencing culture safety. And
Yeah, and we talk in terms of intersectionality of, I guess, alliances of those, feelings that people have that have been marginalised or discriminated against, and, that there are similarities. And often it does come down to a gut feeling or a gut response, right?
Yeah, because we pick up so many signals and sometimes we just know when something doesn't feel right. Gretchen, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really wish we could keep going, but I think we're running a little bit short of time at the moment. But thank you so much. I think Todd's joining us again.
Yes, thanks so much, Gretchen. That was a really important conversation for us to hear about. We're running a little behind time, as Sara mentioned, and since there aren't any questions in the chat, we're going to move on to our next fantastic speaker, Aki. Aki, I'll just give you a few moments to come on screen and gather your thoughts. I know that Sara and you are about to have a really interesting conversation. I know when we did the pre-interview the other day, I learned so much from you, so I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Hello and welcome, Aki, and thank you again, Gretchen. So Aki now is our final guest today, and Aki is an international and multi-award winning disability inclusion, gender equality activist. They are a proud, young, disabled, transgender, non-binary, and LGBTIQ plus queer person of color. Aki, thanks for joining us today. I think you're still on mute. Oh. One moment, sorry, everyone. I wonder if we can.
You should be able to turn your own mic on there, Aki. Give us a. They're shaking their head. Can we get a bit of help with the tech support, please? Sorry, everyone. Just got
It's
a message.
always every
just got a message from the backstage crew. Bear with us a second. Apologies. It's
That
worth the wait.
you can't run an online event without having one tech issue. It's almost tech bingo, and we haven't had one yet. So,
Aki, you should be able to get a request to turn your mic on there. Have you got one? Yeah.
I
And now,
apologize.
there we go.
yay!
So sorry. As
All
soon
good.
as soon as I was about to share, the screen went blank and I couldn't touch any buttons. So I was
No
like,
problem.
Oh,
turn off my mute for me. So thank you. I apologize for that. And
Over to you, Sara.
that's so stressful. Thank you, Aki. Um, so, Aki, can you tell us a little bit about what your experience was like as a child getting support? And I know from talking to you previously that it was quite challenging for you. So, can you tell us a bit about what made it hard?
I didn't get any support. So I
Mm,
think not having support made it really hard. Not knowing that it was possible to get support
yeah,
made it hard. Not knowing that a world in which I could exist as I am, just as I am, made it hard. Growing up as a child of refugees, my parents were refugees. They lived in refugee camps prior to coming to Australia, and we were sent to, people don't know, you're often sent to a very rural regional town. So I was born in Geraldton, Western Australia. And because I was so unwell, I was flown like almost immediately to like the hospital. My parents don't have much education. Their education level is quite low. Their English level is quite low. So there's so much stigma there, but also the contrast between surviving a war and coming and living in refugee camps without any support or any support or considerations. Uh, having or getting
yeah,
support is a privilege, like a full stop, end of story. um like having a roof on over my head and food over on the table, or education, like going to school in Australia is a privilege. Like so anything beyond that was more than I could ever ask for. And if I dare ask for it, or well, if I knew to ask for it, um I would have been a very ungrateful child. Um, I moved out of home at 15 as a result of family violence, intergenerational trauma, a lot of that, but also the embedded stigma within a non-Western. If we think that the stigma that exists around Western culture is overwhelming, you cannot imagine how truly disabling and heartbreaking it is within non-Western cultures. Your existence is determined to be useless or worthless or non-contributory to society, because of your illness. So I was born very unwell. I didn't know or identify with disability. I was just always the sick kid, in and out of
yeah,
hospital, like surgery, back and forth, all of that, without really an understanding or consideration for my own quality of life. But also because my parents I didn't have the knowledge or understanding. I was my own parent. I was my own advocate. I didn't have a childhood. I mean, like when you are taking care of yourself. I was also the youngest out of 3 children. Unfortunately, my
yeah.
siblings didn't take care of me or understand any of those challenges that I had. So getting support or receiving support or any of that
Matters
um,
most.
it was essentially not a thing that happens. And the lack of language and the lack of knowledge. So yeah, essentially what made it hard was I didn't understand disability pride. I didn't understand the social model of disability. A lot of communities presently in, like, let's just say in so-called Australia right at this present moment, that are in non-Western cultures, don't have an understanding of the social model of disability, don't have an understanding of disability pride. And so like there's so many of us, many of those communities that are forgotten about, fallen through the cracks, left behind, especially with the lack of language and understanding and knowledge. The contrast between sorry, my brain just with the previous speaker. I'm sorry, I just forgot your name. My brain just not
Gretchen.
Yeah, Gretchen, thank you. With the First Nations and like that collective, that is the massive contrast is the opposite of that. Like you are like essentially useless, worthless. The language is equivalent to the R word in disability through
That's awful.
through pretty much Japanese, English, Japanese, Cambodian, Chinese, Vietnamese. I don't know every single Asian language, nor I do other Western language, non-Western languages, but it's pretty common.
Of course.
So how can you have pride in something that describes you as essentially a useless,
that you don't have a word for?
And so learning disability, but also learning that I'm autistic, I'm neurodivergent, all of those things were missed because I was a high achieving student, not because I mean, I guess I'm intelligent in the sense of that, but like in the sense of because I came from that cultural background, it was drilled into me that if I wasn't a high achieving student, I was useless and I was worthless. So I guess I had to keep fighting to be worthy in their eyes, my own parents' eyes. So I think that's the challenge, being parenting yourself, but also having to prove your own worth to your own parents when it's not your fault. Like, it's not your fault you have a disability. It's a natural part of the human experience. But I didn't have the pride that I have today, and I don't have the fight that I have today when I was a child, because why would you expect that from a child that's going, in and out of hospital, all of that. And I think the worst thing was, even like, I'm a 90s child. I was in high school about 20 years ago. And even my teachers, I was in year 12, and like so many of them told me, you should repeat, you're gonna fail, you're gonna this, you're gonna that. And I lived in hospital for the first I was only 15, so I was in hospital in year 12 for half the year, and I still got the 90 plus ATAR because that was what was embedded into me to be not worthless to my parents, essentially, to be worth something to them. Without it, not surprisingly, I moved out of home. I'm completely estranged from my family. Have had no contact with siblings, the whole shebang. It's not a fun existence. But I have community through the work that I do in advocacy. So
I wanted to ask you, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, and also just firstly, thank you so much for sharing all that, because I know it's not always an easy thing to reflect on, and it's not an easy thing to experience, but so many people will be listening and relate to your story and feel like a little bit more seen because of it.
Hopefully learn from it. So yeah.
Thank you so much. But I wanted to ask you, because Aki, I know from talking to you that you have found community now, and I wanted to talk to you about how you went from where you were to where you are now, and also about your journey, if you have time to talk about
if I have time. I know we're on a time crunch, so
yes.
I'm sorry.
If there's time.
Yeah, of course. If people are happy to be here and let me so that was all hard childhood. What would have helped? Sorry, I'm just going through all of the questions. What would have helped is having that support and that understanding that language early on. But I think I mentioned my teachers just quickly was because they failed me, like in the sense of because I was the high achieving Asian student. And that's a racist microaggression, assuming all Asian kids are smart. That like literally it was told, oh, you must be good at math, you must be this, you must be that because you're like, I'm very autistic. And I remember once I got diagnosed, my whole world span around, and I remember thinking, oh, that's why I was so overwhelmed and like banging my head against the wall, against the concrete wall in the library as a child, just when I was so I'm like, teachers saw that and they just didn't
pick it up.
I you know, like obviously, like, all of this is triggering. I mean, I was self-harming. I was doing, you know, I was not okay. I was very not okay as a child. And if I did move out of home, I don't think I would be alive today. So I had to do and no child should ever have to do this, but I had to do what I needed to do. And that was to keep myself alive by moving away from the people that were supposed to protect and love me. So sorry if that is a lot for a lot of people. So what I wish would have been different is all of that. And then unfortunately, this relates to community later on, is I experienced a lot of intimate partner violence because I accepted the love that I thought I deserved, and I sought love from people that weren't loving or that weren't caring or supportive or inclusive, and they were physically, emotionally, all the things, forms of violence and abuse that I'm still presently going through, actually. But so my spinal injury is the direct result of intimate partner violence. So then it leads back to community. So my background is public policy and health promotion, and the work that I did in that space wasn't as invigorating. Public health nutrition was great and all, but I wanted to create change. So I used my, I guess, transferable skills within public health and public well-being and health promotion within the violence prevention space. And I got my first job doing a women's empowerment and violence prevention program, which is where I knew I was doing it because of my own experience, but then I got to a point where I felt safe enough, ironically not in the relationship that I'm currently fighting from, but safe enough in that space and safe enough where I am now and in my autonomy as a person to have shared my experience on our site. Actually, our site is a WWDA first iteration, and I was an violence safety from violence, I guess, expert advisory person. And I put my hand up to share my story and my lived experience. And that was the first time I'd ever done that publicly.
It must have taken a lot of bravery.
Yeah. And I felt personally, how could I, which I know that some people will never, perhaps have this ability to do this, and that is fine. And so if I felt that I could share this experience and help others, then I will, because how could I encourage and work and do the work that I'm doing if I don't feel trust and safety within the work that I'm doing? So it's almost kind of which is a lot of the theme of my life, being the representation that I never experienced growing up, and that includes within modeling and fashion and everything that I do in my existence, as a person with so many different identities that overlap and cause so much different types of marginalization and oppression. So the way in which I found community was slowly sharing my lived experience and slowly finding power within my story, and slowly recognizing that I have power within my story, and that, I have a professional, numerous qualifications, but I truly believe that lived experience often can trump most of that lived experience, most of the professional qualifications. But I was able to thankfully link that all together and use my lived experience expertise as well as my professional expertise to carve out the world in which I have, where I know that my experiences matter, but I also can uplift other multiply marginalized people that exist and may have felt any of the emotions that I've probably taken you all on in this very short 10-minute conversation.
No, you've been amazing.
But yeah, I think, ultimately, how I found them was putting myself out there, as scary as that has been,
Yeah,
but I also found safe people in certain organizations that made me feel safe. And some of
that's
which I've been texting just like, throughout the day, you know who you
that's
are.
amazing.
And
Yeah,
including Disability Dialogue, including Dana, including many of the organizations and the people here today. Like even like on the Australian Disability Council, I've got Jane there, I've got plenty of people, Jane Kelly, plenty of
yeah.
people on this panel, on this webinar that are and have been safe people. So finding people is not always easy because it can mean putting yourself out there, but there are people that have been in your position or in some form of your position. And I hope that you know that there is that community that can be found if you don't have family, if you don't have such supports. And so, yeah, that's my little nutshell because we're running out of time.
Yeah, no, but thank you, Aki. And I feel like people can like obviously you faced a lot of challenges, but I think there's a lot of hope in your story and there's a lot of hope in who you are. And I think yeah, you've done it like a brilliant job to become an activist who's making a huge difference in people's lives. And I know it's scary to share your life experience. And thank you so much for sharing it with everyone today because yeah, I think people can really relate and get a lot out of it. But thank you. Yes, I know we are unfortunately running out of time, which is like I think I could talk to you, Aki, for like at least another couple of hours, but unfortunately we can't do that today. Thank you so
I
much.
just want to jump in and say thank you for having such an important conversation to you both.
Mm.
And thank you to Aki in particular for being so emotionally vulnerable. We really appreciate it. The team are putting links in the chat in case that was a difficult conversation for you, or if it brought up some thoughts and feelings that you need to digest. So today has been a really important discussion. Thank you to all our speakers for being here. It came at a really important time when support for kids and families is in the news a lot. As we said at the start of today, the government is going to be talking to a lot of people about how targeted foundational supports is going to work and how Thriving Kids should operate. But we don't need to wait for the government to get started on coming up with ideas for this. We know that people with disability, their family, and their supporters have the best ideas about what it should look like. So over the next few months, we're going to create a different ways for you to have more conversations about finding foundational supports, and we'll have more to say on this soon. So keep an eye out in your email inboxes over the next coming months.
And in the meantime, the next Open Dialogue event is called Facing the Storm Together, How We Can Plan and Respond to Weather-Related Disasters. It's going to be an interesting event. I'm super looking forward to attending that one. So we'll put the link in the chat and you can register for that, or you can find it on the Disability Dialogue website under events. And one last thing, sorry, I know we're running quite late, but we really want to hear from you about how today's events are going. So if you have a moment to complete the survey, we would really love that. And when this event finishes, the survey will pop on screen. So it's also available in the chat. So please do tell us what you thought.
Thanks for being with us today and being engaged and lively. We look forward to seeing you at next month's event. Bye for now.
Bye, and thanks to all our speakers. Bye.